Hello YouTube, I'm here today with a special video. I finally get to review Resident Evil Revelations 2, a game I've been looking forward to for 3 years since Resident Evil 6, the next true sequel in the Resident Evil franchise. And this is going to be special because I am a huge Resident Evil fan. I absolutely love the franchise. It is my most favorite franchise in video game history, besides Uncharted. So it's really exciting for me when a new Resident Evil game comes out. And when I found out that the next Resident Evil game was going to be Resident Evil Revelations 2, that got me even more excited, because I was a huge fan of the first Resident Evil Revelations, which originally came out on the 3DS, and then it got ported to PlayStation and all other consoles. So it's a really exciting time to be a Resident Evil fan this year with the new games that came out. Resident Evil HD Remake came out early in the year. That was great because I never got to play that game on the GameCube, and I got to play it on 1080p Full HD in the remastered form. But that's not what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm going to talk about Resident Evil Revelations 2. So Resident Evil Revelations 2 finally sees the return of longtime fan favorite Claire Redfield and Barry Burton, a character who I've never actually fully played in a full Resident Evil game because I started the Resident Evil franchise from Resident Evil 4. So I never got to experience a story with Claire Redfield as the main protagonist. Thankfully, they finally listened to the fans. They put in a character who is well deserved to have her own game for a while now. And if you didn't know, Claire Redfield is Chris Redfield's sister. She's the cop. She was not the cop. She was with Leon Kennedy in the incident of Resident Evil 2, which is awesome because it's a classic character. So Resident Evil Revelations 2 takes place in the storyline between Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. So it kind of fills the gap in between the two games, just like the first Resident Evil Revelations did, where Resident Evil Revelations 1 was in between RE4 and RE5. And it's pretty cool because the game has some callbacks to both Revelations 1 and RE5. So, for the first time in the franchise, this game also decided to go on an episodic route and split the game into 4 3-hour episodes. Now, how do I feel about that? It's not that bad because eventually the game comes out in full retail disc anyways, so that doesn't make a difference. But, Episode 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all split up into 2 separate campaign parts where you play as Claire Redfield and Moira Burton, and Barry Burton and Natalia. Now, Moira Burton is Barry Burton's daughter, which is the first time you ever see her in the game, even though she's been mentioned before in the history of Resident Evil. And she's side by side with Claire Redfield in this game. And you can see in this game that they took a lot of inspiration from The Last of Us and Tomb Raider, which is a great thing because both those games are amazing. And you can definitely tell because in the first episode of the game, there's a scene where Claire is climbing a clock tower. Even the enemies kind of look similar to clickers, but I'm glad they took inspiration for that, because those 2 games are amazing, and it's something fun to recognize in the game. So, the story is about Claire Redfield, who works for TerraSave, which is that company that you've seen in the Resident Evil CG movie, which is the last time you see Claire Redfield in the timeline of the Resident Evil franchise. You see her working for that company in the game. They're in a party. They get kidnapped by unknown assailants and just trapped on an island somewhere off the coast of Russia. You don't know exactly where it is, but you know somewhere in Russia because there's radio contact with Russian servers. The atmosphere, there's a lot of Russian language and graffiti on the environments of the island. That's why it would make sense for it to be there. I wouldn't imagine it's anywhere else, but that's not that important. But the whole game takes place on the island, unfortunately. That's one thing that the first game does better, because the first game, you're on a cruise ship, you're in Terra Grigia, you're on more than one ship, and this game, you're on the island the whole time, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean the game is not good, because the game is good. The gameplay is very smooth in this Resident Evil Revelations 2. It's definitely feels a lot like it feels in between the gameplay of the first Revelations and the gameplay of 6. They got rid of all that melee and combat, those knockout moves that you can do in karate, like all those combo moves in Resident Evil 6, which I liked, but I can understand fans of the franchise were not happy with that. That's too action-packed. They definitely go back to their survival horror routes. They have their Resident Evil staples in the game. You're going to see a specific chainsaw guy. I'm not going to say exactly what I mean, but it's very reminiscent of the classic RE staples that I've come to experience and enjoy. So Claire Redfield, it's fun getting to play as her because we haven't seen her in a while, like I said. How is she in the game? She's a pretty good protagonist. And Burton adds the balance in the two characters in their campaign. And that also adds to the gameplay, because in this game you get to play as the 4 characters, and you can switch between the 2 characters during the same mission. You can just press triangle, and you need to unhatch a door. You play as Moira. She will get the crowbar and unlock that door for you while you're playing, while the CPU takes over for Claire and shoots out the enemies. And the enemies are something that's new to the franchise too. There's this new enemy type called the Afflicted, which is basically what the mutation is in this game for all these creatures and bioweapons. So the gameplay lets you use machine guns, shotguns, just like similar to the other games. Barry Burton comes more stocked because he knows what he's up against, whereas Claire and Moira are just kind of finding out clues on just who's behind this, who's the overseer, which is the main villain in the game, which is has a huge connection to somebody important in the Resident Evil franchise. I won't spoil it, but you're gonna be like pleased to know who she's connected to. That's the mystery of Resident Evil Revelations 2. It's one of its greatest things. But unfortunately, the ending result is not as satisfying. I will say, though, I did get the bad ending, and I have not played the game yet with the good ending, so I could be very open to change my opinion on the game story once I find out the good ending. But, as it stands, the ending still isn't as epic, as memorable as the first game. And I definitely think its length subtracts from the game's value, because it's definitely a lot shorter from the first game. This is probably the shortest Resident Evil game I played in a while, and I think it's because I think Capcom is working on Resident Evil 7 just like they were working on Resident Evil 6 while they were working on the first Revelations. So as far as callbacks to the first game, yeah, there are a few references to the first game, and there's a few references to Resident Evil 5. There's a part in Barry Burton's campaign where he even mentions Ouroboros. That is a clearest callback to Resident Evil 5, and that's fun because I like to see the connections between the two games. I wish there could be more, like even another character returning, but there's not. There's all new characters. There's some character deaths in this game. There's a lot of crazy mutations. There's some really action-packed parts in Claire Redfield's campaign. And what's cool about dividing the two parts is that you play Claire's part before you play Barry Burton's part. So you'll travel through environments in Barry Burton's campaign that you had gone through 6 months before, where Claire and Moira's events took place. And it's basically a rescue mission for Barry Burton to save his daughter, who he finds is kidnapped. So towards the end of the game, in Chapter 3, you'll get a point where this is a big mistake on the game. There will come a part where you won't even know that it makes a difference, but it's the part that lets you choose a good or bad ending, but it's so vague you would never imagine that it's going to make the decision for the ending of the game. That's something that they should have made more clear, because most people want to get the good ending, because I think that's what's most likely the canon ending to this Resident Evil franchise and the ending you would want. However, the game's full story does come to a close and everything does come together and it gets full closure unlike other games. So I'm very pleased to see that. I will say the soundtrack is decent, not the best, but the environment isn't as exciting as the first Revelations game. It's very bland, and you're just in these plain corridors. I just wasn't that impressed with the environment. Although in some parts, when you're out in the cliffs and the Bay Area, it does remind you of Resident Evil 4. You get that quiet, that calm environment. So it's good to see that come back, but it's definitely not Resident Evil 4. So Resident Evil Revelations 2, at its core, is a great, fun survival horror game with a good action amount and a decent story. It's probably not one of the best Resident Evil games that have come out lately, unfortunately, but it still serves enough to please the Resident Evil fans, such as me. I had been waiting 3 years since Resident Evil 6, and I was not disappointed. So Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a great survival horror game, and it's good to see old faces return in the franchise, and can't wait to see what Capcom's going to do next for the franchise. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is an 8.6. I'm glad to say that. I hope you like what you see. If you have any comments on the game, comment below. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.